Howdy! In this video, we'll talk about the first part of the TEM instrumentation, the electron sources. Let's draw a TEM by hand. So this is the body of the TEM. The electron source or the electron gun sits on the very top. There are generally three types of electron guns. The first type is the hairpin-shaped tungsten filament. The generation of electrons is purely by heat, so that's why it's called the thermionic source. The second type of the electron guns is called lab 6 or lanthanum hexaboride. Again, the generation of electrons is largely by heat because the crystal has a pointy end, so there's some field generated. The last type of the electron sources, which is more common nowadays, is the field emission source. The electron gun is a super sharp tungsten tip. Because the tip is super sharp, the field generated is large to pull out electrons. If the FAG source is slightly heated, then it will be a Schottky source. If the FAG gun is not heated, it will be a cold FAG. Let's look at the characteristics of electron source. For the tungsten filament, the temperature is very high, usually around 2700 K. Brightness is low. The spatial coherency and the temporal coherency are poor. We will discuss the spatial coherency and the temporal coherency in the next slide. Tungsten filament doesn't require a good vacuum, which is actually a good thing. The service life is short, but the tungsten filaments are cheap. For the lab 6 source, the electron gun works at fairly high temperature, but not as high as the tungsten filament. The brightness is okay, the spatial coherency is okay, temporal coherency is okay, vacuum is okay, life is okay, and the price is okay. For the Schottky gun, it's a field emission source. The beam brightness is high, the spatial coherency and the temporal coherency are good. It requires a good vacuum and has long service life. It's pretty expensive, so don't break it. The last type of source is the cold FAG. It is called cold FAG because it works at room temperature, so there's no heating required. This type of source gives you the best brightness and the best spatial coherency and temporal coherency. It also requires a very good vacuum, which means very expensive vacuum system. Since the electron source works at room temperature, dirt may deposit on the tip surface. The user needs to perform a process called flashing to get rid of the contamination. The cold FAG sources are very expensive, so definitely not break them. In this slide, we talked a lot about the spatial coherency and the temporal coherency. So what they are exactly? Here is the illustration. For the tungsten hairpin filament, electrons can be emitted from pretty much anywhere from the filament. Therefore, it has poor spatial coherency. In contrast, the FAG electron source is very sharp, so electrons can only be emitted from the very tip. Therefore, they have good spatial coherency. The temporal coherency tells us the energy resolution of the electron source. For example, we have two electron sources. The first one has energy spread of 1 keV, while the second has energy spread of only 0.1 keV. We say the second type of the source has better temporal coherency. Here, I'd like to talk about some characteristics of the beam. The first is the convergence angle to alpha. Alpha by itself is called the convergence semi-angle. The concept will become very important when we discuss the CBED, the convergent beam electron diffraction, and the STEM, the scanning transmission electron microscopy. The convergence angle to alpha can be calculated by using 2 theta b multiplied by a over b. Theta b is the Bragg diffraction angle. A is the diameter of the CBED disk. B is the distance between the CBED disks. Another important beam characteristic is the beam diameter. So basically, it is how far you can converge the beam to. The beam size or the final beam diameter is a function of dg, ds, and dd. Let's look at these one by one. dg is the Gaussian diameter. dg is a function of I, beta, and alpha. I is the beam current, beta is the brightness, alpha is the convergence semi-angle. To reduce dg, we can decrease I, the beam current, or increase beta, the brightness, or increase alpha, the convergence semi-angle. The figure on the right shows that there is a sweet spot. You can have high brightness and low current to achieve the smaller Gaussian diameter. ds is called the disk of least confusion. It is a function of Cs, the spherical aberration coefficient, and alpha, again the convergent semi-angle. If we are able to reduce Cs, the spherical aberration coefficient, then we can effectively reduce ds. This, in fact, is what the modern aberration-corrected stem is able to achieve. The probe size is refined by nearly removing the ds term. The last part, dd, is the diffraction limit. We have covered the Rayleigh criteria in details in one of the previous videos, so I will not say too much about it here. After talking about the electron sources, in the next video, we'll discuss the electromagnetic lenses as well apertures in TEM.